Every time you reach into a pantry for a can of evaporated milk or pour shelf-stable creamer into your morning coffee, you are interacting with a survival system born from absolute desperation. We take for granted that dairy can remain edible for months, but for most of human history, milk was a ticking time bomb of deadly bacteria. The man who permanently solved this problem, Gail Borden, was not a trained scientist or a wealthy industrialist. He was, for the first 50 years of his life, a spectacularly unsuccessful serial inventor whose bizarre creations repeatedly drove him to financial ruin. How did a man who spent decades failing to build amphibious wagons and meat biscuits quietly dictate how the modern world would store and consume its most fragile food? To understand how Gail Borden reshaped the global food supply, we must start long before he ever considered preserving dairy. Born in New York in 1791, his family migrated steadily westward across the country, constantly seeking new frontiers. By his early 20s, he was living in the rugged wilderness of the Indiana Territory, learning how to survive far from established supply lines. Borden moved further south to Mississippi and eventually crossed into the Mexican territory of Texas in 1829. He worked as a land surveyor, plotting out vast tracts of untamed wilderness for arriving settlers. His surveyor's ledger, filled with meticulous hand-drawn maps of the Texas landscape, showed a man obsessed with order and exact measurement. This early exposure to the harsh realities of frontier life convinced him that humanity was far too vulnerable to starvation and supply shortages. During the Texas Revolution in the 1830s, he founded a newspaper, the Telegraph and Texas Register, to keep settlers informed of the escalating conflict. When the Mexican army approached his printing press, he was forced to dismantle his equipment and flee for his life. Despite his desperate efforts to keep the publication running from exile, the newspaper business left him exhausted and financially strained. Following the establishment of the Republic of Texas, Borden found himself restless and increasingly consumed by the urge to invent. In the 1840s, he became fixated on the problem of transportation across the treacherous, swampy terrain of the Gulf Coast. He designed a bizarre contraption called the terraqueous machine, which he intended to function as both a horse-drawn wagon and a wind-powered sailboat. The patent sketches for this machine depicted a heavy wooden cart outfitted with massive sails and wide, buoyant wheels. He believed this hybrid vehicle would allow settlers to seamlessly transition from dry land to flooded coastal marshes without ever stopping. During its grand public unveiling on the beaches of Galveston, the wind caught the massive sails far too fiercely. The sudden gust overturned the vehicle, violently dumping his wealthy investors into the shallow ocean water. The humiliating disaster destroyed his credibility in the transportation sector and left him deeply in debt. Undeterred by the destruction of his amphibious wagon, Borden turned his obsessive attention toward the preservation of food. In 1849, the California gold rush drew thousands of prospectors across the unforgiving plains, where fresh provisions were impossible to maintain. Recognizing a desperate market, he began experimenting with boiling down beef broth and mixing it with flour to create a hardened, shelf-stable brick. He called this invention the meat biscuit, genuinely believing it would revolutionize military and pioneer rations across the globe. He poured his remaining fortune into a factory in Galveston, producing thousands of these dense brown wafers for cross-country travelers. An early promotional broadside for the meat biscuit touted its ability to sustain a man for days without spoiling, emphasizing its vital role for frontier survival. To promote his creation to a global audience, he traveled to the Great Exhibition in London in 1851. Despite winning a prestigious gold medal at the fair, the meat biscuit proved to be a total commercial catastrophe back home. The American military flatly rejected it, complaining that the reconstituted broth tasted terrible and caused intense nausea among the soldiers. Civilians were equally repulsed by the unappetizing flavor, leaving Borden with massive stockpiles of unsellable inventory. By 1852, Borden was virtually bankrupt, having lost everything he owned on a food product no one could stomach. He was 61 years old, entirely broke, and widely considered a failure by his peers. In 1852, amid his financial ruin, an urgent new obsession began to consume the aging inventor. He was haunted by a tragedy he had witnessed during a transatlantic voyage, where infants died after drinking contaminated milk from sick cows in the ship's hold. This horrifying event shifted his focus entirely toward the seemingly impossible problem of safely preserving dairy. Arriving back in New York, he found an urban population facing a massive public health catastrophe. Without refrigeration, fresh dairy spoiled rapidly, forcing city residents to rely on local dairies attached to whiskey distilleries. These swill milk dairies fed cows hot alcoholic mash, producing a thin, bluish liquid teeming with deadly bacteria. The infant mortality rate in major American cities skyrocketed as mothers unknowingly fed their children this toxic product. Public health ledgers from the early 1850s recorded thousands of preventable deaths directly linked to adulterated urban dairy supplies. Borden realized that a reliable, safe method of preserving milk was not just a commercial opportunity, but a moral imperative. He retreated to a Shaker community in New Lebanon, New York, in 1853 to begin his experiments. The Shakers used a device called a vacuum pan to boil down fruit juices into preserves at low temperatures. Borden hypothesized that this same vacuum principle could remove the water from milk without scorching the delicate proteins. The heavy copper vacuum pan allowed liquids to boil in an entirely airless environment. By lowering the atmospheric pressure inside the sealed copper dome, the boiling point of the milk dropped significantly. This meant the water evaporated rapidly before the heat could ruin the flavor or color of the dairy. Borden submitted his initial patent application later in 1853, detailing this low-heat evaporation method. The United States Patent Office rejected his claim multiple times, arguing that his process lacked true novelty. The patent examiner's official rejection letters insisted that evaporating milk in a vacuum was no different from evaporating sugar. He spent 3 agonizing years fighting the patent office, submitting endless revisions in scientific testimonies. He finally proved that the vacuum process uniquely protected milk from airborne bacteria during the condensation phase, a concept the examiners had failed to grasp. In 1856, the government finally granted him a patent for his unique process of concentrating sweet milk. Armed with his patent, Borden opened his first condensed milk factory in Connecticut in the summer of 1856. Despite the brilliance of his method, he lacked the capital to properly market the unfamiliar, thick syrup to a skeptical public. The factory shuttered within months, plunging the 65-year-old inventor even deeper into financial despair. He tried again the following year, establishing a small operation in Burrville, Connecticut in 1857. The Burrville production logbook recorded painfully small batches of condensed milk, which he desperately tried to sell door-to-door in New York City. The public, conditioned to expect thin, watery milk, simply did not understand the viscous, sweetened product he was peddling. Just as total ruin seemed inevitable once again, Borden struck up a conversation with a wealthy financier named Jeremiah Milbank on a train ride in early 1858. Milbank was intrigued by Borden's obsessive passion and recognized the vast potential of a shelf-stable dairy supply. Within months, Milbank agreed to invest his substantial fortune into the struggling enterprise. Together they formed the New York Condensed Milk Company in late 1858, finally providing Borden with real financial stability. Milbank's capital allowed the company to expand production, aggressively market the product, and educate consumers on how to reconstitute the syrup. For the first time in his long, chaotic life, Borden had built a business that was not immediately collapsing. To ensure the purity of his product, Borden implemented unprecedented sanitary requirements for his dairy suppliers in 1859. He issued strict, written contracts to local farmers, demanding rigorous cleaning of udders and milking equipment. These handwritten dairyman contracts were revolutionary, establishing the first standardized quality control measures in the American dairy industry. By 1860, the New York Condensed Milk Company was steadily growing, but widespread national adoption remained elusive. The turning point arrived with the outbreak of the American Civil War in 1861, which abruptly shattered the existing supply lines for millions of soldiers. The Union Army desperately needed field rations that could survive the brutal, disease-ridden conditions of military camps. Borden's condensed milk, sealed in airtight tin cans, proved to be an absolute revelation for the military command. The Union Army immediately requisitioned massive quantities of the product, making it a staple of the standard soldier's ration. The military procurement orders from 1862 demanded thousands of cases, completely overwhelming Borden's existing factory capacity. To meet this staggering demand, Borden rapidly expanded his operations, building massive new facilities in New York and Illinois. Soldiers learned to rely on the thick, sweet syrup to flavor their bitter coffee and provide crucial calories on long marches. It provided a vital source of safe nutrition that helped stave off the rampant dysentery caused by spoiled camp food. When the war finally ended in 1865, millions of returning veterans brought their acquired taste for condensed milk back to their civilian lives. These soldiers introduced the product to their families, transforming it from an emergency ration into a household staple. The company's sales figures exploded throughout the late 1860s, firmly establishing Borden's creation as a permanent fixture in American pantries. Borden's success permanently altered the economic balance of power within the American dairy industry. The massive scale of his condensation factories shifted control away from small, localized urban dairies toward massive industrial processors. The small urban dairymen, particularly those operating the deadly swill milk facilities, were systematically driven out of business by the superior safety of the canned alternative. His rigorous sanitation contracts, initially mocked by rural farmers, became the baseline standard for the entire dairy sector. By forcing his suppliers to adhere to strict cleanliness protocols, he inadvertently laid the groundwork for modern food safety regulations. When Gail Borden died in 1874 at the age of 82, he left behind a massive industrial empire and a radically safer food supply. The enduring legacy of his obsessive pursuit of preservation remains visible in every supermarket on Earth today. Every shelf-stable dairy product, from evaporated milk to modern infant formula, traces its lineage directly back to the vacuum pans he pioneered. His failure to build an amphibious wagon or a palatable meat biscuit forced him toward the single invention that truly changed the world. Gail Borden's story demonstrates how sweeping industrial transformations often emerge not from grand strategic planning, but from singular, desperate obsessions. Are the systems that protect our modern food supply the result of inevitable scientific progress, or merely the accidental byproduct of one man's frantic attempts to avoid financial ruin? To continue uncovering the hidden obsessions and accidental histories that built the systems we rely on every day, subscribe to our channel.